So yeah, a very warm welcome everybody to day 3 of the GSE virtual conference. You've joined the security stream. Very warm welcome. My name's Jamie Pease. Most of you know me, I know. I'm the chairman of the security working group, so I'll be chairing the sessions throughout the day. Just a quick heads up. For today, we've got an action-packed agenda on the security stream today. We've got 6 sessions to get through, so there's some really good content today. So hopefully you'll be able to stay with us. I've got some couple of other things that I want to have a quick chat with you about at the end of this session. But first of all, the most important thing, I'll introduce you to our presenters, Benoit and Herwig from Deloitte. So over the last 2 days, you've heard a lot about DORA, and certainly in the previous GSE conference and our working group meetings and other presentations that you've heard outside of GSE has been very much a focus on DORA. Hot topic for this year is something that's not going to go away, something that we all care about. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenters, Benoit and Herwig. Over to you. Thank you very much. And don't forget, by the way, folks, put your questions in the chat. Apparently this session, I was told, has been recently delivered and there was a lot of questions, so don't be afraid to ask those questions. Pop them in the chat. The guys are going to keep an eye on it. I will unmute I will enable the line so you can unmute if you want to fire a question live. So yeah, make the most of this session is all I say. It's a very hot topic. So without further ado, over to our lovely presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you all for joining. I think as Jamie mentioned, DORA is everywhere, but I think it's not always very understandable, or at least what is DORA. So I think today we are with Herwig, that is our, I would say, expert from Deloitte, who is focusing on DORA, but more specifically on mainframe. So what it means for the mainframe and the mainframe area, DORA, and how you can support, I would say, the journey of DORA in your company. So my name is Benoit. I'm working for Deloitte. I started at Deloitte, focusing on the security of mainframe manager. And now I think it's time for you, Herwig, to guide us through the DORA. And as Jamie mentioned, we have the chat, but if you want to fire directly questions, feel free. I think Herwig is used to that. Last time, I think at the end, it was more interactive, because I'm pretty sure that we all have questions around DORA, and it's better to ask directly, because if it's a question for you, it's maybe also a question for someone else.
Thank you all for the introduction. So indeed, my name is Herwig Thijsses. I'm a director at Deloitte. I wasn't there always from the beginning. Before I was head of IT at T-System Deutsche Telekom Belgium, and before that I spent decades at Swift in the CIO office, responsible there for compliance, risk, and special projects. Currently at Deloitte, I am actually responsible for the DORA mainframe service development, North-South Europe, and even global. And together with IBM, we actually aligned on an approach to make sure that a mainframe, to put it like that, becomes compliant with the DORA and even some other legislations. I'm not really used to the online format. Normally I'm in the room doing these discussions and this. So in case you have questions, please shoot. Interactive is always fun. So don't hesitate. And in case you just want to do the chat, please do. Benoit will keep an eye on it, and then we will reply to your questions on the moment that it's possible. First, I need to start with an apology. Two, actually. One, I'm based in Brussels. The DORA legislation comes from Brussels, and we know that the UK is not always in favor of that. I'm not sure if that's a joke, that's too soon. And the second thing I need to tell you is I'm not going to go into real technical details here. Why? Because DORA, and you can go to the next slide, Benoit, is actually a business problem. If you go and look at the details of the act, there is a lot of focus on IT, of course, but end of the day, DORA is a business problem. DORA, if you put it black and white, is the reply of the legislator to say, look, in case there is a very big bad event, and what they have in mind is war, and we can even take quotes from the commissioners and the involved politicians that literally refer to that concept, war. In case there is war, we need to have 3 things available to protect ourselves. 1, electricity, water, power. 2, an industry to make sure that we can build the things we need to defend ourselves. And they realized a financial service industry who actually is resilient enough to make able to whoever needs to pay and who needs to do the economic activities to keep that ongoing, because you cannot order your guns, your ammunition, pay your soldiers if there is no banking system that actually is working. So the main core element there, although there are many other elements there also, but the main one is we want to make sure our business of the financial service industry is resilient and secure, and they communicate, etc. We'll go deeper in that. So if you talk to somebody in an organization who says it's an IT or a security problem, they're half right, but not 100%. It's a business process. And we have seen now, and we're talking to a lot of banks, we also have boots on the ground actually on a lot of banks and insurance companies these days, that the organizations are getting to understand that. They were waiting a bit on, okay, there is a legislation, what is it actually meaning? We will have time, it's not yet clear. But now the last 2-3 months, actually, they're like, oops, this is a little bit more intensive than we thought. Because end of the day, it's not about backing up a database. It's not making sure your DB2 is up and running again. No, it's making sure your instant payments are working, which is much more complex than just an IT system. Of course, IT is extremely important to make that happen, but it's not an IT problem, it's a business problem. We will go a little bit deeper in that later. The DORA legislation, I'm not going to go in all the little details, is capturing what we call 4 pillars in a foundation. It's, of course, the risk management, your ICT risk management. You need to know where you have the risk so that you can act on it or accept it, which is also important. Your cyber incident reporting. If something goes wrong, you need to know that it's happening. You need to report it to the right people. You need to report it with sufficient impact, and I will go also deeper in that. Your resiliency testing, I discussed it. You need to be able to resist, to be able to recover in case something bad, extremely bad, or catastrophic happens. And a very interesting one also, and a new concept actually, not a new concept, but it's more emphasized in the legislations than before, is that ICT third-party management. You need to know what the risks are of the partners you're using to deliver your business services. Again, business services. It's not only your database. If you're relying on another database with a supplier, the big examples are, of course, the clouds, then you need to know that that supplier is ready to make sure that if something happens, your business process is working. And the excuse, hey, my systems are working, but the partner I'm using is failing, so I cannot actually execute my business process anymore, is gone. That means that you didn't sufficiently, as your organization, controlled your partners, controlled your vendors, your suppliers, and it's your responsibility to make sure that they have their risks under control. So the banks will, as insurance companies, the payment intermediates, everybody who is in FSI will have to make sure that the whole ecosystem of their business services is actually according to the DORA legislation, which is more than just putting in a contract, you need to be compliant with DORA. That's a very good first step, but it's certainly not sufficient. You need to know it's working. Next slide, please. So the DORA timeline, very short, because we're actually at the end almost, but there was a whole evolution. And we had the luck as Deloitte to be actually involved from the start with our regulatory advisors in the beginning that went through all the lines. Started like, yeah, around 2020. Very important that last year the actual legislation was approved. It came into force, and then, which was a technicality, because DORA is actually quite technical, but a lot of the technical details had to be defined. They said it's a little bit more than a year ago that, okay, we will release a couple of papers in 2024 where we're going to go in detail what you need to do. And they went really in detail. And this happened now. We have those papers. So officially, by January 17, 2025, an organization has to be compliant. What happens if you're not compliant? It's the same thing as like GDPR, the privacy legislation. You will potentially be fined. The big thing is, like GDPR, the fines are quite heavenly. If you make a real, if there is no effort, very limited progress, an organization makes mistakes in becoming DORA compliant, then the fines can be up to several percentages of your global revenue. Very important. I mean, the global revenue could be for big companies, hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, euros, dollars. So there is a big stick in case you don't do it. Next to the fact that DORA is going much more in detail as other legislations that are covering a bit the same topics, where they literally say, and it's an interesting term they're using, look, in case there is something, a material happening, you will have to inform the regulator within 2 calendar hours. Calendar hours. What does it mean? It's not just Friday at 5 o'clock something goes wrong and you have until Tuesday to give the regulator heads up, and your peers, by the way, because there was a banking holiday. No, 2 calendar hours. 5 o'clock, the incident happens. It's defined that it's material, and there are quite some strict rules for that, what's being considered material. For example, it impacts more than 50,000 of your clients, or you have an impact on your solvability of more than 50 million and things like that. You will have to inform the regulator when it happens at 5 in the evening, before 7 in the evening. If not, you're too late. Not saying that the regulator will suddenly fine you with 100 million because you're an hour late, but yeah, it doesn't mean you have to wait a week. So you need to have processes in place to take into account, is this an incident? Is this a material incident? What's the impact on our organization? What's the impact on our financial situation? And that's an interesting one. Do I need to communicate to the regulator or not? If somebody needs to take that decision and get the information in 2 hours, yeah, your processes needs to go smooth. Next slide, please, Benoit. Now, when you look at the mainframe there, because the mainframe is for a lot of these institutions, very, very important because it's their core. 80% of their core processes are actually happening on that machine. I mean, or machines. It's not just something where they say, oh, you do a regulatory analysis, you do some gap analysis, you adapt some contracts, and effectively in the market, we sometimes see that this is still a bit the intent, because they say, oh, we have all those other legislations, we're compliant to it, so we're okay. But in general, they're not. Why? If they look at the mainframe also like, oh, we have invested a lot of time and effort in our non-mainframe environment for whatever political reason or strategic reason, and the mainframe, oh, that's secure, that's safe, we don't need to do a lot of there. I think in the case, yeah, please. Was there a question? In case you have a question, just shout or put your little virtual hand up, and then we will notice. So what we see in the market is that often the mainframe is considered extremely secure and already under control, where with the old legislations, actually this is probably the case. With DORA, doubtful. because you need to look more at your resiliency. You need to go into your SIEM integration and not just in your mainframe situation, but you need to include all the information. You need to make sure that your operations support, cyber risk and governance processes are all integrated with everything. But at the end of the day, somebody needs to have that information to see there is an incident. And I'm going to give an example of an incident. Doesn't have to be a foreign country that blows up your data center. That's pretty clear that there is an incident. Could be that there's a critical batch service that's not working. Is that a big incident? Is that a material incident? You don't know. And we talk to a lot of the clients, and if we start asking those questions, how do you know? It's how can I say, not always relevant, but the answer they give. An element that also has to happen in DORA is the mainframe forensics, the red teaming. I mean, the DORA legislation has strict rules about the testing and the evidencing of your controls. You yearly need to test and evidence that it's working. And again, you don't need to evidence that your DB2 database is actually up and running. You need to prove that your business process is up and running, which is relying on your DB2, but also on your RACF. And we had a situation where everybody was very ready for in case something happened. They went up and they forgot about logical access security. So you had a very nice system up and running, but nobody could access it. So these things need to be tested, need to be evidenced on a yearly basis that things are happening here. And the red teaming, yeah, I mean, your intrusion testing of the mainframe, it has to become part of the normal yearly evidence, and you need to do this legislation-wise. Your technology roadmap checks are part of DORA. See also where are we going with our mainframe? Are we going to be able to become more compliant? In case you have a gap in your compliancy versus DORA, what are we going to do in the future to fix it? Or do we accept the risk that we have a compliance issue? Things that internally needs to look at. And it's not just the process, it's sometimes also the technology, especially for the resiliency. Because there is a lot of business decisions that have to happen, and that needs to trickle down to the mainframe. Next slide, please, Benoit. Now, the scope and the impact of DORA on the financial sector, and many of these, especially the bigger organizations, have mainframes, is quite severe. I mean, in Europe, it's 8,104 financial entities at the time that we did in 2022, the analysis. And it's not just European banks or insurance, it's any organization who does business with a European citizen. So you could be in South Africa, you have a bank, but you have an affiliate in Europe. Yeah, you have to make sure that those people are actually, that your bank is able to keep on providing these services. The pillars are in DORA quite clear, but if you look at the old regulations and guidance from the regulators, yeah, it's not new. So normally an organization should have done already some work there, a lot of work even, to make sure that these things are under control. But the legislation DORA goes a bit further. Again, business, not IT. The rules are stricter. 2 calendar hours, not weeks and weeks and months before you tell the regulator even if you would do it. So the technical requirements of the DORA legislation are much more defined, and the commitments that are requested and demanded are much more strict. And the fines for not doing it are much, much, much higher. And there is another informal element which actually makes DORA, how can I say, more important than other legislation, although there, of course, every legislation is important, is that who inspects your compliancy? With GDPR, also big fines, the privacy legislation, you had the data authorities, your data commissioner in the UK, who inspected the legislation, if this being followed or not. Honestly, they don't have a lot of people to test or to inspect. The financial regulator, anyhow, I can guarantee you, It's not that they have thousands and thousands of people, but for any critical bank, there are people there whose job is to keep an eye on these banks. So the inspection risk for a DORA is much higher as, for example, a GDPR risk. Next to the fact that the internal audit departments have DORA in their scope also. How do we know? Regrettably, I have to say, some of the banks are hiring the people from the Deloitte team, for example, to increase their knowledge on mainframe and DORA legislation in their internal audit departments. So we know that the bank's internal audit, chief internal auditors have this in their radar screen because they're trying to recruit the people who are able to do it. So that's probably on the short term even more relevant than the inspectors of the regulator, because we know that in 2024 there are specific internal audits called DORA, and in 2025 even more, next to management self-assessments even. There is one element here that's important for DORA versus the prior legislations. Because the prior legislations were a bit more loosely, senior management often got the call or the information like, yeah, we're compliant, which is true. I mean, very likely the organizations were compliant. We see now in the bank sometimes a ping pong, why do we need to do more for DORA? Because we were already compliant with the EBA rules for resiliency. Because DORA is stricter, DORA is a little bit more. So potentially you need some investment there. And ignoring DORA because you are compliant and you have a green report for the other legislations is, let's say, hopefully you're lucky and everything is indeed from the level DORA would be there. But I would check. Next slide, please, Benoit. Now, the scope of DORA is very encompassing because it is a business problem. I mean, you have your 3 lines of defense, the CISO, the CIO, your second line of defense, your risk management, your non-functional requirements, risks departments, and your third line, your internal audit. All these lines have responsibility under DORA because governance is a very important element of the DORA legislation and risk management. And it's the first line of defense, of course, the CISO, the CIO, who needs to make sure that all the elements that are actually part of that IT risk management, resiliency management, incident management, third-party management are in place, working, testable, evidenceable, and when it comes to when it happens, actually works. So the technology, a lot of people are focusing on the technology and the contracts, is only one element there. Your technology needs to be adapted to do all these things, which means your governance, risk, and compliancy tools needs to be there. You need to be able to get the information, analyze it. You need to know that the technology, for example, to make sure that your mainframe is resilient, is in place, implemented, tested, and working. But if you have that, great. But if you don't have the governance and organization to deal with the information and with events, yeah, it will not work. So stupid thing, stupid example. In case there is an incident, who's going to decide that you're going to report it to the regulator or not? I mean, it's not going to be the mainframe operator who says, hey, there is something that didn't go like it should. Okay, he will put the incident in the ticket, etc., etc. But who is then going to assess that this is a material incident or not? And after that, who's going to assess that this information, maybe we need to share it with our regulators or with our peers because this is relevant. The intent of the regulator is there, especially worst case scenario, of course, when there is an attack, that one organization is attacked first or notices it first, and that in a very speedy time, actually the whole sector is aware of it so that the impact can be mitigated. So it's not just an organization. DORA is actually a systemic approach to make sure that the sector survives a structural attack. And you do that by sharing information in time. And that's the core. And end of the day, that's what the regulator will see. They will not care too much about left or right, a little detail, but they want to see, like, if you are impacted quite heavily, do we know it quickly? Can we give this information to the sector so that they can, the sector in its total becomes resilient? Of course, when you implement controls and risks, you're talking risk appetite. I mean, what's relevant, what's not relevant, where do we implement, where do we not implement? That's a question of also the business model of the organizations and the strategy, and that needs to be looked at, decided about, and the regulator will want to see, okay, what are the decisions you take? Because they are certainly planning to challenge in case they find the risks that you take too high. If a bank would say, look, we just focus on our distributed environment and our cloud and our mainframe, we ignore, we think it's okay, and we don't know even what's happening there from a DORA viewpoint, the regulator will say, yeah, but that's 80% of your core systems. I think you need to do something. So they will start pushing there. And the risk appetite internally needs to say, yeah, you don't do too much. End of the day, money has to be made. Risk identification, quite clearly, of course, you need to know what goes wrong and what are potentially the things that go wrong. You need to measure and monitor them so that the decisions can be taken or risks accepted. And then, of course, yeah, you need to make sure that you have the controls in place, and where you don't accept the risk, you mitigate, procedural, technically, etc. And then, of course, your second line and third line of defense will look at all those things that the first line of defense, the CISO, the CIO, and his teams have, and their teams have implemented and are managing, and make sure, yeah, that in the end of the day, the total risk is in the acceptable range. Next question, please. Slide, please. Yeah. So to become compliant in DORA in a big bank with a mainframe, it's practically impossible to not include your mainframe environment in your gap analysis for DORA. Next slide, please. So what we do as a Deloitte, and this is nothing special, we do a DORA scope identification with what we call a primary scope and a secondary scope, technical versus business. We do the gap analysis there. We identify, okay, compliancy gaps and process maturity levels, and then where needed, where decided yes, we can support organizations, or the organizations implement themselves the solutions. And all of this in a streamlined communication and governance, internal and external, because end of the day, you have the things that can happen and you have to manage internally, but there are elements that you need to share because of the DORA legislation with the regulator and with your peer groups. So you get information from peers and you give information from peers. Because if the regulator's intent is to make sure that the more information is shared between the industry, the more safer the industry becomes. So, but again, these are also competitors often. So yeah, you need to, do I share not too much? Do I share not enough? These things also need to be streamlined. Next slide, please. Now, the primary scope in DORA, what we call primary scope, the critical or important functions, and this is a DORA term, it's about, okay, ideally you have enough resources and budget to just say my organization, my bank, my insurance company, my payment messaging service, whatever, is critical and important, and we will protect everything. But that's expensive. We have one example, actually, where there is a bank who is for DORA building now, currently, in Portugal, to be specific, although it's not a Portuguese bank, a fourth data center. Their decision with DORA was, look, everything is critical. So and there were also other reasons than DORA, but okay, everything is critical. We just built a fourth data center, and that's our DORA solution for everything. Hugely expensive. They basically say our minimum is 100%. General, an exception, but there are other reasons why they do that. So if you look at your primary scope, and there the business head come in. I mean, this is not done by IT people. This is done by business people. So we have boots on the ground in a couple of banks where we're doing this. This is not a Benoit who is a mainframe guy. This is really persons who are experts in insurance or experts in banking or experts in whatever financial service that's there. And they're looking at business processes and they define which is the critical function for the organization. And it's not only functions, it's also sometimes there is an example of a bank that says, look, our subsidiary in Serbia, we're going to sell that in 6 months, so we don't consider that anymore as critical. We don't include that in our DORA scope. I mean, this is spending the level that you're talking. Yeah, you need to make sure which process is important for your business and which entities are important for your business. And that's going to be your scope for DORA, and that's what you need to protect in the DORA scope. And you need to, of course, be able to tell the regulator, this is the reasons why we're doing that. The primary scope is business. And you need to see then, what do I need to be able to make this business resilient? Organization, people, buildings, IT, funding. So which third parties you need to know. The example here is from a bank. So you have deposit takings, lending, payments. So when you do this analysis, you really go over all these business processes. You go to the supporting business processes and you really say, okay, this is relevant, this is relevant. And one bank or one insurance company there, it's not the same. For some banks, for example, the retail payment service is extremely important. It's like 95% of their business, while maybe the underwriting is 1%. So the payments will be a focus of that organization, not the underwriting. Why an insurance company who has a lot of underwriting but no other elements will ignore the rest and just focus on that. So the definition of what is your critical and important function is key, because that will drive everything. Also, especially the IT. Next slide, please. Because then you take your primary scope, your top-down analysis, and you take your CIF, your critically important function. For example, here payments, and then you need to drill down. Which are the other business processes that actually are relevant for my primary critically important function? So you will see that suddenly other business processes are needed. Otherwise, you cannot do that from a business viewpoint. It's great if your payment system is working, but if your client account management system isn't working, you will not do a lot of payments because your payment system is not able to actually see which is the client, what are the interest calculations, etc., etc. The accounting, also maybe not a critical important function at first, but if you don't have it and you then go into your minimum viable organization, like we call it, and after a big problem, the organization you build up again, yeah, you will see that something is not working. If you have done your other essential business processes, you need to see which are the supportive business applications supporting all these business processes. Spending your architecture. There's a question I will repeat here. Besides self-assessments, which external body will conduct the inspections? That's normally what we call the ESAs. So you have the EBA, and you have the banking and insurance authorities in Europe anyhow. In the UK, you have your own, of course, separate organizations who will analyze this. So there is not one organization, in Europe, you have the European Central Bank, who is coordinating the inspections, but they are going to use the other, the EBA and the insurance company regulators to actually do this. In Europe also, there is going to be an alignment between the different national banks, because each organization will be able to pick, how can I say, their primary DORA regulator contact there. Because you will have many, often these banks have many, and insurance companies are everywhere, but there will be one who is responsible then, normally where the headquarters is. So they're just piggybacking on the current existing inspection organizations, and which is going to be in Europe, of course, driven by the ECB, but in the UK, yeah, you have the Bank of England, who is going to not the DORA legislation on its own, but there is legislation being created that actually aligns it almost 100%. But for the institutions in Europe, they're going to have the EBA, they're going to have ESA, they're going to have the European Central Bank, the normal inspectors. So it's going to be integrated there. Now I need to track. Oh yeah, the support is business applications. Yeah, your mainframe. I mean, if you have a mainframe and use it only for, say, something insurance, and because the organization bought at one moment an organization was doing insurance and having a mainframe in it, but it's not a SIF, then your mainframe could be out of scope. Very unlikely. More likely is that when you have a mainframe in your organization, it's used for a lot of critical things, and yeah, it will be in scope. But the first thing you need to do for your business applications is looking, okay, which are my supporting ICT processes, which are relevant, your logical access, your batch job, your encryption, your certification management, which is actually explicitly mentioned in the DORA legislation, certification management and encryption. It's considered very important, and your management of it is considered very important. So, and that's the legislation itself. It's not just an interpretation of a text. No, it's literally in there. So you need to know which are your ICT processes and tools that are supporting your business applications. Then you need to, of course, which are the stacks that are supporting that. And then in your specific stack, you need to look at all the elements that are actually providing the IT services to make all those things happen. So if you want to make sure that your payment is resilient, working, and you know incidents, then you have to make sure at the end that all your technology stacks are under control. So it's a drill down from the business viewpoint to, yeah, even sometimes really technology details like HSMs for your encryption keys, making sure that those, something happens, okay, yeah, you have your application online, great, but yeah, we forgot to make sure that the HSM information is available, and okay, boom, it's gone, no business. So that you need to do. Then you need to actually do the analysis of, are you compliant or not? Is this part of the SIF or not? Or is it supporting the SIF? What are the gaps? And then you have to make sure that you, with certainly risk assessment and a plan, can fix all the gaps that you can consider to make sure, end of the day, that in this example, the payments process is working again, in case, yeah, worst case scenario, everything goes down. The secondary scope, I mentioned that already, for the minimum viable organization, which is also an interesting concept here. The organization has to actually decide with those critical and important functions, what's our minimum viable organization. If we would go completely 100% down, everything is gone, could be a cyber attack, could be a physical attack, could be a technical bug, could be whatever the reason is. Worst case scenario, everything goes down. What would be the business processes and the supporting organization and IT that we bring back up within the times that are required from the DORA legislation, which would mean as fast as possible, frankly. There you need to look at, it's not just mainframe. I mean, of course, when it's a critical infrastructure, you need to look at your mainframe and involve it, but it's also the interactions that you have with your distributed systems, Unix, Linux, Windows, with your cloud platforms, and due to the impact on the business processes, with your SaaS. I mean, you could use things in the cloud which are not really on the hyperscalers, but services. Stupid example is maybe there is a big bank which is very reliant on a specific provider for the management of its buildings. And not only the management, but also the renting out and the the technical support of these buildings. Now, if that provider would not be reachable anymore or would go down, the bank would have a problem because suddenly they're not able to manage, for example, stupid things as access to their buildings. On the other hand, they would also not be able to collect rent for the buildings that they're renting out. And if that's material, yeah, it's part of DORA, and you need to make sure that your SaaS service is actually working in the worst case scenarios. Next to, of course, the normal elements like for the IT support tools, yeah, you have a lot of things happening also in the cloud these days. So you have to, if you want to go up and make sure your systems are being fixed and the problems are being fixed, but you don't have your ticketing system, yeah, and everybody is saying, I cannot do anything because I don't have a ticket, you have a problem. Those things need to be considered. So that's an element that you also then in your secondary scope see, okay, what are my core systems and what do I need to make my business process work? And you will see that often the mainframe in the organizations with the mainframe is very important there, and that the links with the other elements are also important. But yeah, if you just say we don't focus on the mainframe because that's being compliant and that's working and it never goes down, yeah, you could have a problem, but minimum you would need to be able to demonstrate that you looked at all these things and that everything is green. And if something is orange or red, that you have a plan to fix it or a workaround. So that minimum viable organization is key, and very, very likely your mainframe will be in it or parts of the mainframe. Because, yeah, again, black and white example, your test and development environment, although it's not sure, maybe not needed for the minimum viable organization. Your production, yes, but in your production, which LPARs, which data? I mean, it's often huge. So if you take an account like the mainframe as a black box, and we do everything for everything on the mainframe, it's going to be very expensive and maybe not possible because the interactions between all these elements are maybe so time consuming that you will never meet your deadlines, or you don't have the staff to do it. So, or you don't have the budget to do it, frankly. So you need to see what's there the best way. Sometimes, like at one bank that's building a fourth data center, they invest hugely. Other banks really tailor, and investment companies tailor and carve out, okay, these are the things we need. And yeah, they invest to make sure they have that ready. In the solutions and in the data recovery and in the forensics analysis in case there is a big problem. Because once you have a problem, you need to solve it, you need to be able to analyze it. And there you need to see, okay, do we need this or not? Do we invest in it or not? Next slide, please. So in the mainframe, if we look now, we're agnostic, but okay, it's mainframe, so let's be realistic. There are some solutions there that stick out. For the data and application resiliency, and you have, for example, the CyberVault solution with the whole ecosystem. But there you need to decide, what do I back up? Where do I take my golden copy? Do I use my golden copy for forensics? Do I use my golden copy for intrusive analytics after I have my copy from production, so I can see if there is something really waiting there to happen in the future? Because there are examples these days of where even the mainframe is being attacked successfully by yeah, let's call it ransomware. Do I test my backups? You have the 3 types of tests for the CyberVault, your normal technical, your logical, and then your business logic. Do I do the 3 tests before I back up? How many times do I back up? There are decisions to take there, which has a huge effect on how long the restore would take, but also on how much it costs and how much investment would be from the beginning. Your third-party management, I mean, am I just being able to hook into the normal processes from procurement and risk management to make sure that the providers that are supporting me on the mainframe are there. I'm thinking like organizations like Gemalto for the HSM, Are they, if you use that kind of HSM, are they ready? Can they support me? Is there something wrong? They will tell me in time. IBM, of course, although IBM is, that we know, busy with preparing their service lines for DORA support. The intrusion testing, how much is that happening? Is it hitting the high risk areas sufficiently so that you know, or is it always hitting the distributed and the mainframe is considered completely secure? And you need to have a good reason why. Doesn't have to be always red teaming. You can also do vulnerability checks, internally checking like that. Your logical access and security, of course. If something goes wrong and everything goes up, is my RECF ready? Do I have the people to make sure everything can be adapted to the new situation? Incident configuration and management. How do I know that my mainframe is compliant and remains compliant? That's a big question in DORA. And in the mainframe, there are not too many. We see very tailored solutions there. So there you need to see, okay, there is currently not yet a very antivirus solution, I would call it, but you need to know that your compliance is being monitored somehow. And in case there is a drift, something is getting strange, that you're aware of that in time. And then, of course, the normal security monitoring, not the compliancy monitoring, but the security monitoring, where you need to see, okay, something is happening here, strange behavior, next to the normal operational monitoring, your batch jobs, your execution, etc. So around that mainframe in DORA and with those pillars, yeah, there are things to do or to make sure that you can evidence that you're doing them. Because it doesn't mean that you're doing them, that you can have evidence it, that if the auditor comes, especially your internal auditor, and say, yeah, I'm doing this, and he will say, yeah, but are you doing this 24/7? Who looks at the reports? If something happens, what happens with that report and with that information? Because that information in the end has to trickle down to where the decisions can be taken in case for DORA context. So a lot is in place, very likely, in the mainframe. So what we see here is that the gap analysis, if we do the DORA gap analysis, is that we don't expect to find really big gaps, except maybe in the monitoring element for the configurations, but okay, that's something special. But it has to be structured and it has to be put in a way that you can evidence it and that it doesn't take too much time from the teams managing this to do this job, because let's face it, the teams involved in the mainframe operations, they're quite busy. And what we also see is from a security viewpoint, and now I'm going to say something maybe that's politically not correct, because the mainframe is very secure, there is a kind of a bias that it is secure. And due to that and the fact that there are not too many people really technically skilled to look at these systems, mainframes, and the whole stacks and assess them, we see sometimes that the hygiene is not always like it should be, especially from a DORA perspective. And we identify regularly then like, hey, why is there public access on a critical library? These kind of things. So the security settings of the mainframe are so trusted that they're not looked at often, and that, yeah, sometimes there is some slippage. And with the DORA context, yearly, you need to start demonstrating that everything is under control and security in your risks. So there will be an increase of monitoring on these things. And also the tools are getting more and more capable of reporting that real time. So what we see now in our DORA implementations, and indeed on a security viewpoint, there is some cleanup to do often. And that's certainly something that management better does before that the internal and certainly an external audit is happening, so that, yeah, you basically can sign off and say, look, my systems are DORA compliant. Next slide, please. Yeah, if we go the full approach, you basically need to do your focus and priority analysis, which is the SIFs. You need to look at, okay, what's in scope, what not, the business processes. That's that one slide I showed where you really go from the business process to the technology stack. You do the analysis. In case it's relevant, you say, look, I do a process maturity. I mean, maybe I have the process, but it's a level 2 and it should be level 3. The technical roadmap with the gaps. Okay, mainframe is mainframe, so it's not that you just go out and buy something and fix a problem. You need to see, okay, when, where, how much is it, and do we do it or not, and where do we do it, and then actually implement. So it's often multi-year planning, in case planning what your problem is. Certainly when an organization is not yet for their storage and data resiliency is I can say not that mature yet, and you need to start implementing things like cyber vault or other mechanisms to make sure that your data is resilient and checked, and you can restore at one moment with certainty that you don't restore the problem again. Yeah, that's not done in 2 months. It takes time. But from a regulator viewpoint, if we go at GDPR, the first year they will put pressure, they will put self-assessments, and they will make sure that the organizations are busy with it, but it's unlikely, except for some specific big organizations who had problems in the past, go and inspect. And that more in 2026, they're really gonna start inspecting, but that's an assumption. I cannot put my hand in the fire for that. For the same amount, the 18th of January, there are inspectors on site. But I think next year they will more look at, are you knowing your problems? Are you busy fixing them? Do you have your processes in place and you're just maturing them? So, but you need to have that information to give them the comfort that everything is fine. And again, not only IT, also process and policy, organization and people, strategy insights, and yeah, the integration of the communication, very important. Because that's another element. Let's say that there is a bank A that has a problem and there is an indication that there is something happening on the mainframe. They report it to the regulator. Another bank has the same problem. They report it to the regulator. A third bank has the same problem in a certain, like 48 hours. They report it to the regulator, and the regulator decides, something's happening, and sends out a message to all the banks and say, look, this is happening, be careful. How do you know when you're operating your mainframe? How is that information coming to you? Because if then suddenly you have the problem, and it's like, oh yeah, but we were informed a week ago that other banks had this problem, you can stand there and say, look, if you had told us, we could at least have, we could maybe have prevented it. So it's not only information going internally outside, it's also information outside coming in, and you need to be able to get that information and deal with it. Is it relevant for us? Not relevant for us? Because if you get that information, you don't react on it, and there is a problem, the regulator will say, what are you doing? I mean, it's the two-way communication is important. Next slide, please. So there are, of course, use cases. I mean, for the DORA roadmap, the risk management, third-party management, incident management, disaster recovery management. These are just a couple of examples of use cases that can help, because what we also see at the bank often is that they have a resiliency project in place, or are doing it or planning it to have more resiliency. Even 2 years ago, budget was approved and it's ongoing, and that project is there. But now with DORA, they need to look at that project again. It's not just like, okay, we have a project, we're okay. You need to map that project then with, okay, are we indeed capturing everything we need to capture? Because that business problem / the critical information, are we in the current project doing what we are doing to become DORA compliant? Or are we doing too much, but that's okay because we have internal reasons? Or do we need to expand the scope because, yeah, we're investing, so we better do the full scope of DORA instead of a partial one? These things are the use cases, and these things are happening today already. But if they're happening already, you need to reassess them and see, do we have to do more or potentially less? I see there is a chat. Okay, 10 minutes remaining. Next slide, please. Voila, that's actually it. If you have questions, please shoot. And yeah, the contacts are there. So I hope this was informative, not too technical. And again, if you have questions, don't hesitate. We're more than happy to reply to you. And I'm open for questions in case you have them.
I think you're on mute, Jamie. We cannot hear you.
I hope that was not to me, because that would have been a very, 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 very boring
No.
presentation. Then.
But in the meantime, as Jamie is checking for his, I don't know if you have questions or if you want to share any experience that you have currently with DORA, or if you have received any questions around DORA.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, indeed.
Oh,
yes.
sorry about that. I don't know what happened with my headset. It just kind of went to sleep. Yeah. So, any questions from anybody? Any? You can unmute your line, by the way, if you want to fire a question directly. If not, I've got a couple of questions actually, but myself. But I'll save it for a moment. Give everybody else the opportunity. No, I suspect that people are probably a bit in. So my immediate reaction to, I mean, I knew about DORA because I've seen some of the presentations. I'm sort of vested interest in it. Like my first thought that comes to mind is like this is yet another regulation that's come in. Is there like a danger that like these organisations are just going to be overwhelmed or are now overburdened with or just strangled effectively with regulation? I mean, I know there's some overlap with some of the other things, so it's just like, well, we'll just kind of rinse and repeat. But what's your thoughts on that? Because I suspect after DORA's done, there's something else on the horizon that's going to come in.
Always. Yeah. Now, two replies there. One, when I recently talked to a CIO, and this is something that pops up quite often, is that 50% of his budget goes to compliancy when it's a bank or an insurance company.
Right.
So they're complaining a lot. That's the last 20 years. I never actually had in my career that they didn't complain about that, because they say, yeah, I mean, the percentage went up actually. In the beginning, it was like 30%, but now it's often like half of their IT projects are going to compliancy elements. For example, with the stress testing, with the negative interests. I mean, that's also business, but that's a fact. I mean, especially in financial service industry, you will have to spend a lot of money and resources to on compliancy. Very simple. The second element is the resources internally are scarce. Often, if you're lucky in your organization on the mainframe, but I don't think I have ever met an organization that said, oh, I have sufficient people on my mainframe. They don't have to do overtime. They can do this. So, and they have to do the daily business. So it's at the end of the day, yes, you need to be ready when there is a big incident. But at the end of the day, you need to make money. Eh? So they are doing their stuff, and they're often quite already pressured, because if they do this, that means there is a certain business process, a business project initiative that maybe is delayed. So certainly there is pressure. And also that's, sometimes you need to think then about, do I need to stop and put the pebble out of my shoe so that in the future I can run faster? And sometimes implement, especially, for example, on that compliancy tracking. We have seen organizations where this is done by the operators with Excel sheets, end of the day. So they do one run of the compliancy check every 6 months, and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks of effort. While there are indeed, software now available that can do this every 3 days in like an hour, and you have a report. But it means that you need to have a project to implement it. So you need to stop to put the pebble out of your shoe. But once you have it, yeah, your operators can actually deal with, I think, more motivating elements. And that the resources is certainly something that's under pressure, especially in the mainframe.
Yeah. I mean, I have no doubt. I mean, I do. You know, at the end of the day, I think it's something else that just concentrates the mind. You've just got to get better at this stuff. And I mean, like today, for example, it's the 25th of the month. For most people, it's payday. You know, no one wants to see like no payments being processed. You know what I mean? Some kind of incident that's happened and your salary's delayed. So that is a good thing. But no, it's just no. Thank you for answering that question. It's just the extra burden on business. And the other thing that I was going to mention was, say, you mentioned the deadline of the 17th of January 2025, so like you say, it's just not that far away in the grand scheme of things. In your opinion, I mean, are a lot of businesses just not ready for, are they? Do you think they're going to miss that deadline, or kind of sort of carry on regardless?
we see a catch up. They were a bit instead like they did always with most legislations. We saw the same with GDPR. They waited until the last minute because they were hoping that things would change. With DORA especially, because those technical papers were actually released quite recently. So they had an excuse and say, yeah, we don't do anything because, yeah, we don't know the details. True. On the other hand, you could predict for 90% what would be in there. But yeah, of course, 2 hours in case of a critical incident, yeah, if that's 2 hours or 6 days, in the end, that doesn't make too much difference. But we see now there was a delay in implementing and reacting, but we see now at the organizations we talk to, and actually Deloitte is doing a benchmark on that for the whole of Europe, that they are kickstarting and say suddenly like, oops, now it's happening, it's not being dropped, and it's actually much more complex than we thought. And the projects are they're busy. The gap analysis are busy. The implementations, we are being asked to look at mainframes and do the gap analysis there. Internally, this is happening. So there is a reaction. Will all of them be finished by the 17th of January 2025? Very unlikely.
Yeah.
But based upon GDPR, although I cannot put my hand in a fire and say it will be like that. The regulator is the regulator. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
I think my personal opinion, not signed with blood, is that the regulator will, and that's starting actually already end of this year and certainly beginning of next year, will shoot out their self-assessments. And based upon the replies from the self-assessments, will start asking for updates.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And if you can say, look, I'm looking at my mainframe, and that's a core system of mine, and we're doing the analysis, or we have done the analysis by the 17th of Jan. The regulator will be say, okay, these guys and girls are on top of it, and it's not fixed. Okay, yeah, we will ask statuses. So I think if you can demonstrate that you're busy with it and you're busy with the right things.
Yeah.
Yes, we know our SIFs, we know our critical, we know our secondary scope. We have done the gap analysis, or in worst case, we are busy with gap analysis, and we are planning to fix the gaps. I think the regulator will certainly say, okay, they're busy.
We can see you making progress.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, guys. Certainly an eye-opener. Another thing for us to keep us awake at night. Well, and like I said, I like what you say. I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there that are getting on the bandwagon. This is a technology issue alone, and I'm quite reassured by this. This is business-driven problem at the end of the day, isn't it? And not everything can land in. I'm sure people are just saying, this is an IT problem. You go and sort it out.
Yeah.
So it's got good to hear that from you. So
and in that context, maybe we also see that sometimes happens like, it's an IT problem, and then the minimum viable organization is everything.
Right.
And then IT comes with a huge budget request.
Yeah.
And then the problems start. So and in the end, that's where IT needs to be aware that it's not my problem, the scope.
Yeah.
Yes, I will fix it, but you business have to tell me what my scope is. Otherwise, I will ask for the 200 million while I maybe can do it in 30.
Yeah.
So that's IT needs to be aware that it's not just fix it. It's also like, but tell me what to do.
Yeah.
So-
Good advice. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks
Thank
for
you
your
very much.
preparation.
Thank you.
Brilliant presentation. Really enjoyed that. Certainly some food for thought. So yeah, don't forget, folks, if you're still on the line, to give feedback for Benoit and Herrick's session. So this is session 8M. Don't forget, you know, if you want your CPE points at the end of the day, you're going to have to fill in your feedback form so you get your certificate generated. And it's important feedback, you know, for the guys, or any of the presenters as well, that you give feedback on. So don't forget to do that. And we've got it's under 30 minutes now, break till the next session. But we're going to be back in this virtual room at 10:30 UK time with IBM Z-Secure Development. They're going to be talking about the Z-Secure, I saw Z-Secure feature on your slide.
Yeah, it's a DORA solution.
Yep.
Tweet.
Yeah. So they're going to be talking about their Z-Secure admin web user interface. So one not to miss. So I hope you can join us for that. Thanks once again, guys. Brilliant session.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.